Good morning, Indonesia. Let's see, are we live yet? I don't see anything on screen here. Hang on just a second. Let me make sure. There. Okay. Kill that. And hello, folks. Hello, world. Welcome to Radio Farside. If you're watching live from anywhere in the Western Hemisphere, I have just proved that the world is round, because it is broad daylight mid-morning here in Jakarta. And if you're in the Western Hemisphere, you're either on your way to bed or you just finished dinner and you're watching this as a way to put you to sleep. So this is our second live stream. I'd like to point out the studio cam here. You can see me sitting here. I've got my wonderful morning beverage, courtesy of Florida and Russia. So we're ready to go. And this is our second live stream. The first one got off to a rocky start, but has been very, very popular. 10,000 views, more than 10,000 views, with Joseph Farrell and Catherine Austin Fitz discussing the Q phenomenon, which was a mess. But you can go to my blog. You can find, if you go to the website and you scroll all the way down to the bottom, you'll find a link to the blog site, and there you can find roughly 36, 37 articles on Q, starting back in 2018, March of 2018. So followed it for a while. No, it's more than that. No, that's right. Okay. Anyway, what this is all about, I'm putting this under my Jungle Rant section. This is about elections. And I was inspired to do this by the fact that I've heard so many people in the US saying that our elections sound like banana republics, third world kind of stuff. We don't have this kind of thing in the US. Well, I'm going to tell you that you don't, here in the third world, in what amounts to a banana republic, our elections are much more transparent than anything I've seen out of the US this election season. Now, when I say banana republic, I want to clarify that I do not think that Indonesia is a backward country. Au contraire. Oh, hello. I see Dominic. Hi, Dominic. Nice to see you. Thanks for joining. Au contraire. Indonesia is a republic nominally, and living here, I've discovered that there are at least 15 varieties of bananas. Everything from about the size of my thumb up to these big, mean green things that they call horn bananas here. We call them plantains. But there are so many different kinds of bananas you wouldn't believe it. And so since I live in a republic with 15 different kinds of bananas, I guess we're a banana republic. And on top of that, we have elections here. I've been through 3 presidential elections in Indonesia, beginning in, I believe the first one was 2008 or 2009. And so I've had a chance to observe how they are operated here. And the way they are done here puts the US to shame, puts it to shame. I'll tell you why. The way Indonesia is organized, and you may find this interesting or not, but it sets up the point. The way Indonesia is organized is that there are things called PTs or PT and not PT, sorry, RT, RT, and RW, RW. The RT, for the sake of argument, to simplify things, let's say an RT represents 10 houses. All right, so in my neighborhood, my RT represents 10 houses, and the head of the RT is elected every 2 years by a neighborhood vote. And the RT reports to the RW, which, again, to simplify, might represent 100 houses, so 10 RTs. And the RW is similar to what we would conceive of as a precinct. All right, so the precinct would be my RW. And the head of the RW is also an elected person. I think also the 2-year term. So every 2 years we get together and vote on the RT and the RW. They also act as kind of a sheriff's deputy. They provide the security in the neighborhood, which might be similar in the U.S. to a like a neighborhood watch, only they are deputized. And we have, in my neighborhood, they still go around and bang on lampposts in the middle of the night to signify the hour. So they go around and actually clang on the lamppost for 1 a.m. and clang, clang for 2 a.m. It can be a little annoying if you're trying to sleep or you have insomnia, as I often do, but they are there. And it's probably much more restful knowing that somebody is patrolling the neighborhood when in the U.S. you never know. And the cops are usually too busy to be bothered anyway. So what happens during an election, or let's say my wife, who is Indonesian, would go next door to the head of the RT, and she would present her identification, which is a formality because we have to register with the RT when we move here. And so they know who we are. And I literally live next door. My adjoining wall is the head of the RT. So she gets, from him, she gets a document, a signed document, saying that she is a resident and that she is an Indonesian citizen and is allowed to vote. And she will do this probably a day or two before the election. And then the polling place is literally across the street or across the alleyway from my house. So the precinct polling place, I can see from my front door. I can watch things go on. Now, this is not the interesting part. The interesting part is that on election day, the elections take place from 7 a.m. until noon. That's it. Only in-person voting, only paper ballots. So my wife walks across the alleyway, gets her ballot, marks it up, and we all wait for noon. What happens at noon? Well, they set up some tables, and the local officials, the RT, the RW, they all get together and they count the ballots live in front of your face right here at the office across the way from my house. So I can sit here and I can listen and hear them. Oh, look at that. We have Chris is in the house. I invited a friend of mine, a fellow expat here in Jakarta. I'm going to bring him in and take off the studio cam. Let's see. Hang in there, Chris. I'm trying. Add to stream. And There you are, Chris.
Well, I'm
You're down
amazed
at
by
the
this
bottom.
technology.
Well,
Am I in the Matrix?
I think, well, you're in the Matrix, but let me,
Morpheus.
I think that's you.
Morpheus.
Yes, that's you. Okay, I took off the
Hey,
studio cam. I was
he's
just
just coming
explaining
here.
the election process here in Indonesia and how on election day, the voting stops at noon, and then they literally count the votes right here in the RW's office right across from my house. And I can sit there and I can tally up who got how many votes. And this is what's called the quick count. Now, you've lived here. I've lived here 13 years. You've lived here how many?
24.
24 years. So you've seen a few elections. I've seen 3 of them. And the paper ballots are counted right here in front of my house. I don't have a choice because they use a PA system. So I have to listen to the count. And then I can make a note of how many votes for each candidate. And a few days later, I can go to the national website and I can check if my RW was properly represented. So it's an interesting system that's much, what's the word, safer than the U.S.?
More transparent, perhaps. Yeah.
Certainly more transparent. There is, of course, ballot buying and ballot stuffing and all of that goes on here. But there's no way to use or abuse the system the way it has been in the U.S. Now, you're Canadian, so you have even a different point of view from me. What is your thoughts on the elections in the U.S.?
In the U.S. Well, I think, yeah, it seems to be. I mean, if we look at it, I'm sort of taking a step back, It seems to be, the US seems to be, I think everyone agrees that it's sort of on a slippery slope and it's going down and down. And this seems to just be another rung, on the trip down, because it does seem, I mean, I don't know who could really certify and endorse such a ramshackle and confused process. It really, we saw all the warts, we saw total chaos. And so it wasn't really, like, I don't know how you could walk away from that and say, oh, well, this is a fantastic democratic exercise and everything's okay. I think, in fact, it simply showed that there does seem to be some sort of decline. I don't know why. I mean, remember the Al Gore? Remember the Al Gore and the George Bush election? That was seen as, remember the hanging chads and all this. There's all this discussion about the hanging. Most people probably forget that sort of stuff, but there are all these discussion over hanging chads. And at that point, I remember it seemed like a total fiasco. But we were sort of told that, well, it was a one-off thing. So how can it be happening again?
Well, what's more interesting is that the Bush v. Gore thing only involved a handful of counties in one state.
That's right.
This one is multiple states,
yeah.
And it's a complete mess. I think anybody who's honest with themselves can't admit that there's anything valid about this election. At least in a handful of states, the 5 contested states or 6 contested states. But we have to imagine that, I mean, for instance, the Dominion voting machines, the idea of using computerized voting in Indonesia is absurd. Everything is hand marked and you have to show up in person and you have to present ID and you have a few hours. You have from 7 until noon, and the votes are counted live in front of you for your precinct. And how the U.S. has gotten so far afield is a mystery to me. What's it like in Canada? You haven't been there in a while, I guess, but run us through what a typical election would be like in Canada.
Well, it's sort of different in that you're voting, like when you go to votes, you're voting just for your district. So like I've only voted once in Canada, so I could have prepped if you told me what sort of questions you're asking. But as far as I remember, I might be totally off base here, but I don't think you actually vote for the prime minister. You never have the choice of the prime minister. There's never a vote where they say, do you want Justin Trudeau or do you want? So it's done in a way that you simply vote for the person in your area. And I remember the one time that I voted, I was 22, I think, or 23, and I knew that the person in our area, he was a conservative. I remember because it was his policies. It was really the party, because you have to make a strategic decision. You know what I mean? Right. You can either vote for the person in your area, or you can be thinking of the national. You see what I mean? There's all different levels, but you only get that one vote. You don't get to vote multiple times. So your one vote is sort of like a one-off thing, and it has to be a multi-purpose vote. So it's going to determine many things. But in fact, I might be liberal at one level, a liberal candidate. I might be conservative at another level. I might be NDP at another level. But you only get that one vote for the person in your municipality. So I remember my shock when I went into the voting booth. And actually in the voting booth, when you have the list of candidates, they don't indicate the party affiliation.
Oh, okay. That's interesting.
So I was totally taken aback, because I couldn't remember the name of the. I wanted to vote for a conservative for some strategic reason, but then I couldn't remember the name of the conservative. There were just 3 names there, and I had to choose. Actually, there were 6 or 7 names, because there have been these joke parties that have crept into Canadian politics, like the Rhinoceros Party. I assume you're familiar with the Rhinoceros Party.
Yes, I've heard of it. Yeah.
So it's just because the whole process is such a joke. I mean, the Canadian system is very stable, but on the other hand, you have very little choice. So there's always a balance, right? Between, you can have a lot of choice, or you can have a lot of stability. And in Canada, I think we have a lot of stability. So to mock this process, people actually invented a party called the Rhinoceros Party, which was just a total joke. And their first order of business was to declare war on Belgium. And I forget even why. There was they had taken some slight from Belgium or something, or some obscure reason why they was to do war with Belgium. But the fact is,
the cheese was moldy or something.
Yeah, it was something. It was deliberately. It was like a Monty Python sort of
French fries or Belgian fries. Absurd.
Yeah, it was all dada sort of stuff. But the funny thing was that once you get your name on the ballot, it does not say Rhinoceros Party. So simply by virtue of having your name as one of the 5 or 6 names, you actually stood to, just by error, a lot of people would vote, because they actually, when someone's campaigning, he might campaign on the party. You see what I mean? He's campaigning on party principles. It's not about his personality. It's not about his vision. It's about the party. But then when it comes time to vote, you just have a name. So actually they garnered quite a few votes, and it is suspected that it's simply from this phenomenon that when people go in the voting booth, they're totally disoriented and embarrassed, actually, and they just they just
start punching buttons.
Yeah, they get out a dart, put it over a throat. So the Canadian democracy, I think, is not very democratic. You have countries like Italy where it is extremely democratic, right? Because when you think of it, what we have in Canada is, I believe it's the same in the US, that when you have, let's say you have a county with 50,000 people, 30,000 vote for party A, 20,000 vote for party B. So party A wins. But those 20,000 people, their votes are totally discarded, right? They have no influence on the political. In Italy, they believe that's wrong. So for every 5,000 votes, or they have some threshold, even if you lose, you see what I mean? It doesn't matter who wins and loses. It matters how many blocks of 5,000 votes you get, and that will. So it's very representative. But the
I'd see, yeah.
And in Canada, we're not at all representative. All those 20,000 votes would be thrown away. And
isn't that a feature of parliamentary systems, that no matter how many parties you have, you get a certain amount of representation based on your votes, and then they form coalitions, and there's all this wrangling. And I know a little bit about it, having lived in England and also next door to Canada for most of my life.
Mm.
So I've watched a little bit of it, and my impression of parliamentary systems is, now it may not be the same in Canada, but you basically get the amount of representation that your vote, percentage-wise, that your vote represents. And then those groups haggle with each other over, coalitions and who's going to get the majority to do things like select prime ministers and that kind of thing.
That's right. That's perfectly correct. But when you think about it, even when you count the number of representatives and then they make coalitions on that, what about those votes that lost? You see, this is the point I'm trying to make, is that
right.
Yeah. So in my example, those 20,000 who did not win, they are not part of the parliament. They're not part of they're not represented in any way. Whereas in Italy, they would be represented.
Right.
So yeah, so it's extremely representative. But the problem in Canada, I would say, is that we sacrifice representation for stability. So we're very, very stable. Like there's not coalitions coming apart and breaking apart, and in Italy they have these bizarre parties that are represented, because if you only have a small number of votes to have representation, then you have these bizarre parties like the Christian Marxist Party. Yeah, they have the Catholic Marxist Party. They have the Bolshevik. These bizarre hybrid green parties. Whereas in the Canadian system, these smaller fringe movements are sort of, it's like a filter. Our system's like a filter. It filters out all the crazies, and, so to speak. Wow, I don't want to say crazies, but the more fringe parties are not represented, even though nationwide they might have millions of votes. They are just simply, it's a process of natural selection, and they are not represented. I think that's one of the weaknesses of the US system too, is that although it has great stability, you only have two parties because of this, of not taking account of these minority losing votes. Think of how the US system would be different if you had a third party, a fourth party, a fifth party.
Well, what actually forced the two-party system was the Electoral College, because the winning candidate had to have the majority of the Electoral College. Having more than two parties usually split the vote so much that nobody ever got a majority, and it always went to the House. And for that reason, it kind of forced everything into a two-party system in order that somebody would always come up with a majority, although we may see something change this election. And I'll get to that later. There's some interesting legal aspects to this. But
is this why the leftist groups wish to eliminate the Electoral College? Aren't there radical leftist groups that wish to eliminate it altogether? Is that why they?
Well, certainly they want to go with a completely democratic system, which if you get 50 plus 1% of the vote, you can do whatever you want. You can run roughshod over everybody. The classic description of democracy versus republics is, a democracy is two wolves and a sheep voting on what's for dinner, and a republic is two wolves and a sheep voting on what's for dinner, and lamb is not on the menu. Right. So there are advantages and disadvantages to both systems, and I think the U.S. system kind of strikes a middle road between parliamentary. The EC is really kind of a vestige of a parliamentary system, where the what Italian system might be more of a pure democracy. The idea, though, of a republic, though, is my rights are sacrosanct, and no matter how many people you elect or how many votes you get, you can never touch my rights. And I think that's the prime difference between a democracy and a republic. But it doesn't always work that way, though.
Yeah, but don't you see that system of checks and balances? I mean, I see it as being eroded now, that there are powerful forces that are seeking to erode the checks and balances. I mean, look at the media. The media is one of the, you might say the media is one of the balances that it is there as a critic of the government, right? And we see that eroded.
Well, and for myself, having worked in media most of my life, it used to be there was a standard that people imposed on themselves, reporters and journalists imposed on themselves, having a sacred duty or a sacred responsibility to report facts. But as corporations began taking over media and then consolidating, so that now we're down to 5 or 6 corporations that own most of the major media in the U.S. You can't depend on having an unbiased eye or a watchdog role for the media, because they really have become mouthpieces for whatever the agenda of the corporations are. And if you look at the board of directors of all these different corporations, what do you have? You have the same people sitting on the boards of all 6 corporations, and there's no difference. There's no subtlety to any of it.
Especially in the U.S. election, you know, as an outsider, just looking at the questions of the 2 candidates, you know, you can see that the one candidate is just being given softball questions like, what's your favorite color? And, you know, why don't you get angrier at the other guy? You know, how, you know, things like that. And meanwhile, the other candidate, they're just openly throwing insults. The question in itself is not a question. It's just like an open insult. It's just a slander of him, you know. So I mean, we can see that the sort of watchdog element is totally gone. Do you think that will continue once Biden becomes president? Do you think they'll suddenly flip and they'll suddenly start attacking him, or will they continue just praising him?
Well, I think who they want is Biden, for whatever the agenda is, obviously, because Biden is controllable. He based on the evidence we've seen in the past few years, he is in the pocket of anybody that's willing to pay the price. There's no doubt in my mind that he is he's kind of a mid-level mafia type, where he is paid to do a certain job. So if they can get him in,
he's a team player.
What's that?
Yeah, he's a team player. He's a team player.
He's a team player, and he's mid-level. He's middle management. He has a certain amount of discretion, but most of it is what he's told to do. The reason I suspect that Trump is probably in that same category, but for a completely different faction. And that's why there's so much rancor in the U.S. Politics right now, beginning since he announced. And you can see this going back to 2012 when Ron Paul ran. The man was invisible, literally invisible. If he, there's one famous example where he got 3rd place in one of the states, and when they ranked the people on screen, they literally skipped from 2nd to 4th place and didn't even put his name in there. It was mind-boggling. And nobody, but nobody seemed to care at the time. But now, of course, it's become It's become a bone of contention, I suppose.
Well, yeah, I think certain things brought that to the forefront, like the Hunter Biden laptop scandal. Like this may seem like a strange approximation, but if you remember the Johnny Depp trial, when he was talking about he was defending himself from defamation, he said that I'm the victim, and he brought in, if you look at the evidence, he brought in all these folders and files, CCTV witnesses, witness accounts, videos, all this evidence, like a mountain of evidence. And then on the other side, the counterparty, Amber Heard, she just said, "Well, you have my word." And the judge said,
Yeah.
"Oh, we have her word."
Of
It was sort of like
course.
that with the
I was
Hunter
such a
Biden
fool.
scandal,
We have
because
her word.
that's right, because the Hunter Biden, the laptop, I mean, it's just a treasure trove of documents, 11,000 photos, 20,000 emails, and all damning, and they can all be checked. I mean, the FBI had it for a year, but made no comment. They can't authenticate it. They can't say anything.
Right.
And meanwhile, on the other side, you just have Joe Biden's word. He said, "Oh, I deny it. Oh, it's been disproved." He just kept saying.
Yeah. Oh,
Meanwhile,
well, of course. How could I
meanwhile,
have
for Trump, some of the
not seen it?
things that they did against Trump, where the one thing wasn't it just a comment in a bar? Someone overheard. I'm not making this up. Yeah, I'll have to check on the source. But there was apparently an Australian. Did you hear this? There was an Australian diplomat in a bar, and he was talking about Trump and Russia or something, and someone overheard them, and that turned out to be the basis of the whole investigation. Was hearsay of hearsay. It was hearsay in a bar that they heard. So you see, the standards for evidence for the two different parties are greatly different. I mean, it's an obvious whether or not you support one or the other, it doesn't matter. You have to objectively say that there seems to be a very high bar for the one candidate, whereas for the other candidate, any gossip or rumor or anonymous whistleblower, oh, that's sufficient, sufficient cause. Yeah.
Yeah. In fact, interestingly, almost the entire contents, unedited and unexpurgated, of Hunter Biden's laptop were available on Taipei, Free Taipei, or Free Taiwan, one or the other. It's a group of freedom fighters in Taiwan, and somehow they had the entire contents of the laptop. And I'm including all the photographs that everybody won't talk about, everything, and you have to wonder, how in the hell did a bunch of Taiwanese website runners get all of that data? And
well, what you want to ask the media, though, what you want to ask the media, they immediately dismissed it. They said this is obviously a misinformation campaign. But as a Canadian, I just want to ask them, don't you want to know? Like, aren't you curious? Like, don't you want to know? And I guess the answer is no. They don't want to know. They're like the proverbial ostrich that puts its head in the sand, and they're not interested in knowing. They don't want to know. They don't want to know. They don't want to see it. So that, I think we can talk about an eroding, I think, of the checks and balances. And then the Supreme Court, the Democrats would say that also has been compromised, because it's so partisan now. The Supreme Court is supposed to refer to the Constitution. Am I right? It's not supposed to be partisan. It's supposed to be based strictly on the letter of the Constitution of the United States. But now the fear is that it's so partisan that it too has been eroded.
Well, that was something that came up almost immediately in American history. Once the Supreme Court was seated and actually operational, the idea of literalists versus interpretists, where and dealing with lawyers, that it's not the letter of the contract, it's the where the commas are placed, and why did they choose this particular tense. So you can drive a lot of trucks through that kind of stuff. And I think that's been one of the major failings of the U.S. system, is this idea of judicial interpretation rather than just read the damn words and tell us what it says. Does my argument fit the words better than that person's? That's all there is to the argument. But the courts have insinuated themselves into a position of power where they are allowed to interpret what they think. And I'm not a big fan of precedent either. I think every case should be judged on its own merits rather than, well, this is what we decide. That's a cheap way out. What we decided 150 years ago was a different world with different problems, and the arguments are never exactly the same. So each argument should be decided on its own. I don't know what your thoughts on that are, but I'm not a big fan of precedent.
Well, that's the American system, though, right? And the Canadian system, right? The common law system. We look at precedents, whereas the European and also the Indonesian system, right? They look to the letter of the law.
Right.
But could it be, though, Bernard, that there's actually a bigger problem that trumps, forgive the double entendre, but it trumps everything else. And that's the fact that maybe people, they just don't believe anymore in the system. They don't believe in the United States. They won't stand for the national anthem. They won't salute the flag. They say, oh, there's something symbolic about it. Well, from an outsider, though, it looks like they just don't believe in the system anymore. You know about this movement now, the 1619 movement, that it's attacking the basis of the whole country. I think, and the number of Americans now, it's been pointed out, who believe in socialism. They believe that socialism is something positive that we should try. These are undercutting the very basis of the country. So I'm just throwing it out, but from an outsider, it looks like people simply do not believe in the system anymore.
That, to a certain extent, that's very true. And part of that, at least in the U.S., is the history of the U.S. is one, what do they call it? Oh, gosh darn it. I can't. Rugged individualism, first of all. And second of all, this idea of equality that, it's in the Constitution, all men are created equal. Well, they think that means everybody should get $1,000 a month and have the same goodies in their house and the same car in the driveway. And I have all the same stuff you do. And that's not what equality is. Equality means that you have access to the same opportunities that I do under a system that supports your rights, so that if you believe that you can go do something and you are within the law and you make $1 million, that's your money. And that's equality. There's no such thing as equality of, everybody has the same stuff. So, okay, there's billionaires and there's poor folk. Well, that's the way it's been for all of human history, and that will never change. Having been a monk, I've been a Benedictine monk, so I have seen communism on a small scale, where everybody contributes to the community, and everybody, you wear the same clothes, you have the same food, everything is the same. And so I have lived communism, and it does work on a small scale, where everybody in the community is focused on a certain ideal. Fine.
Right.
But on a mass scale, where you have competing interests and people with all kinds of different skill sets and desires and whatever, there's no way that you can make everybody equal. It just won't work.
Yeah, I mean, it's sort of a simplification, but they say that capitalism is the creation of capital, whereas socialism is basically stealing capital. It's taking other people's capital and distributing it. And I think we see this contradiction recently, to illustrate what I said about people not believing, is when you have these NBA stars, right, who are very vocal. I mean, some people jokingly now call them activists, right? They're not athletes, they're now activists. I mean, it's more important than they're multimillionaires paid to chase this ball around, but they're all, totally politicized. And it's so invasive in the game that the game is actually taking a back seat. But when they're in China, because they also have the league in China, suddenly they shift gears totally, and they say, oh, no, We don't believe politics has any place. Now, why did they do that when you think about it? And it's because in China, they believe in the system. They believe, even you can say it's repressive, it's totalitarian, but the average person, they believe in their system, and they will not take anyone, they will not accept that anyone would critique it in any way. Whereas back in the US, it's the opposite. In fact, it's the opposite. Is everyone is standing on the flag or burning the flag or urinating on the flag, and they refuse to salute, they refuse to stand. So we see that. I think that illustrates what I mean is that it seems that we are in a crisis in the Western world where it's not just the US, it's all the West in Europe where they feel it's wrong to uphold the law.
Yeah.
And I've spoken to people and said, look, if you think that it's wrong to stop people flooding across your borders, then why not change the law, right? Why are you allowing
Right.
this activity to continue? Why not change the law and say it's okay to have open borders? And we can't do that. But that's the de facto situation. Well, we can't do that. Well, why not? It's sort of strange. I mean, who can really support this ramshackle process where thousands of people die? I mean,
Yeah.
isn't it interesting that we never see footage in Libya where all these people, we never see it. It's just it's blacked out, right? But if you watch some documentaries on channels like Al Jazeera, they
Right.
will show you that the fishermen won't even fish in those areas. There's so many bodies in the water that they will not fish there. They're terrified. There's so many dead bodies, and it's a huge humanitarian crisis. And this is caused actually by the European, because they don't believe in the system, or they don't believe in borders. But if you say to them, okay, well, make a law that you want to take in 1 million refugees, and but do it in a humane way, put them on a plane, give them a basic health check, do they have tuberculosis or the plague or something, and then fly them over. But they don't do that. I mean, why do you think that is, Bernard? I have my own theory, but let me ask you why you think that is.
Well, if your goal is to undermine the system of any country, then the first thing I would do is flood the country with quote unquote refugees from other places that whose cultures and politics and legal systems are wildly different from the host country, which in our case would be North America or Europe. We have wildly different customs and traditions and legal systems, and you flood the country with people like this who do not assimilate. And as a consequence, you and I both know, I've been here in Indonesia for 13 years. You've been here for 25. And, we've assimilated to the extent that we've learned the language, we've learned the customs. We know, the Javanese people are like this, and the Sundanese people are like this. And we know the lay of the land, and we behave within that system. But if you and I were to come here and form our own little enclave where we don't abide by any of the laws of the host country, we don't observe any of their traditions, and we radically attack anybody that tries to change our little way of life here, that's an invasion by definition.
Yes.
And
yes, good point. I mean, in fact, the first Brits who went to India, they were warmly welcomed. Yeah, they were warmly welcomed, the first British traders. But with time, it's exactly as you say, they're not assimilating. They're not adopting the native dress. They're not following the local laws. They, in fact, they say that they need access. So therefore, they must have control. And then they must institute their own laws. And eventually it is, like you say, it's an invasion. And that's what happened, isn't it? The Brits took over India. They took it over completely. And that's what I think we're seeing in Europe. So yes, I have to agree with you that it does seem to be an invasion, because if Merkel is so concerned about human rights, why not just make it legal? Just say, okay, well, we agree to take in 1 million people, and we've decided that we will have a quota for this, but they don't. They simply allow the status quo to continue, which causes death, mass suffering, and not only for the migrants, also for the local population, right?
Yeah.
The stress of dealing with these people from all over the world who commit horrible crimes, some of them who live on the streets, who cause considerable civil disorder and unrest. There's constant riots and demonstrations in France. Why,
Yep.
why did they do this? Why, if it really was a humanitarian purpose, it is very strange, isn't it, when you think about it?
Well, and it's not only that. Every society has a finite number of resources that they can commit to the people that are within that society. We have only so many hospital beds. We have only so many jobs. We have only so many places to live. And to accommodate 1 million people in most countries is a strain to any society, much less ones that are not prepared to bring in that number of people into the existing system. I think about here in Indonesia that if you brought in 1 million people, because in time that I've been here, the maximum number of foreigners that were living here at any time that I've been here was about 50 or 60,000.
Right.
And
right.
they're strictly limited, strictly controlled. You
right.
and I know we have all our documents and go through that whole process. But if they were to bring 1 million people into Indonesia, it would crater the country.
Yes,
because
totally.
They can barely handle the native population, and to assimilate 1 million people into this country would just it would implode.
Well, yes, and also remember that the population here is 270 million.
Yeah.
So that 60,000 people is actually just a drop in the ocean, right? Whereas in the US, if you look at the numbers coming in every year, it's absolutely stupefying, the number of illegal migrants flooding across the border. And any talk to, not to stem it, but just to look, we want to know who's coming in. We want some control over our borders, is called racist or retrograde or atavistic xenophobia or something. There is obviously, I mean, I don't believe in sort of conspiracy theories, but when you're confronted with the consistency of these views and these different people, they all seem to be in lockstep. They all seem to have the same view. I mean, there is a difference between a conspiracy theory and a conspiracy, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Well,
right? I mean, you see what I mean? I mean, it's sort of written off. Oh, it's a conspiracy theory. Well, there is such a thing as a conspiracy too.
Yeah.
It's not just a theory.
Well, in U.S. law, I mean, they have what's called RICO, the criminal conspiracy law. There would be no need for that law if there were no conspiracies. And, one of the most famous assassinations in all of history is Julius Caesar. And that was a conspiracy. Conspirare. Yeah. We breathe together. We whisper together.
That's right.
So, I mean, that's the whole nature of it is if you have two or more people planning to do something, good, bad, or indifferent, it doesn't matter. That's a conspiracy by definition. If you and I make a plan to go meet somewhere, that's a conspiracy. Now, granted, that's not the usage that most of us use, but in fact, conspiracies are everywhere. They're all around us. It's a normal part of life. And to say that they don't exist is ignorant, or you're just being a jackass, really.
Yeah, there does seem to be coordination among certain groups. They seem to know that this group, and like even the hardcore Islamicists, they are actually in lockstep with the feminists or something, what I mean, on certain issues, and it's never articulated, and yet you can see that they are somehow acting together. They seem to have a common purpose, and I would say the purpose is simply, as you say, to flood the country with refugees, and then I don't know what the next step is there, or could it just be that it's purely commercial? It could just be purely commercial. You know what I mean, Bernard? It could be that this ideology is all a smokescreen, and that in fact it's just good money. These people that are flooding in, it's actually modern day slavery. You don't come in and then, oh, okay, I'm free now. You know, you have to pay back the money that was invested in you, and they will tell you how much that how much that sum, what that sum is. So
Right.
you're not wearing physical chains, but and yet there is this invisible infrastructure that brands you as a slave, and you will be in the US as a slave, and that is purely commercial. So all this ideology about human rights and open borders, could it just be all a smokescreen, and we should just follow the dollar, just follow the money?
Well, I think to a certain extent it's a smokescreen, but on the other hand, I think a lot of the people that espouse that idea are useful idiots. They don't really understand what they're talking about, and as a consequence, they they they're reacting with their heart, but not their gut, not their mind. They don't see that it's really bad for these people that are brought in, because they're being used.
Yeah,
And
yeah, you're not doing them any favors actually
yeah,
by letting them in. You're not. I just heard George Clooney speaking very emotionally about the oppression in Hungary and how people are oppressed and they're suffering in Hungary. And I just had to laugh. I mean, where does this come from? This must be a useful idiot by your definition.
well, yeah, I've been to Hungary. I don't think there's
Yeah, me
all that
too.
much oppression.
It's a great place. I don't see any. I've
Yeah,
been to Buddha. I've
beautiful
been to
country,
Pest.
great
I didn't
people.
see any suffering. Yeah,
And if
I
there are
didn't
any
see people
Hungarians
being
in
whipped
the
on the
audience,
street.
God bless
Or,
you. It's a great place.
yeah, yeah. I didn't see any death squads or
Impossible
anything.
language, though.
Oh yeah, even goulash
Yeah,
is different. Can you believe it?
yeah, yeah, it
Even
is.
goulash is a different word. Oh, we don't say that. Oh,
But I
yeah,
guess
but
the thing I can see about Hungary is that they're very, very, very selective about who they allow in,
hmm,
and the even as a tourist, it's very hard to get in, and your time in the country is highly regulated.
hmm,
Um, and I don't blame them. If you look at the history of Hungary, they've been so isolated
hmm,
that their language, and I mention Hungarian because it's an unbelievable language, and it doesn't
hmm,
really match anything else in Europe.
hmm,
It's a glutinous language, meaning it attaches all these weird prefixes and suffixes.
hmm.
Um, but they've been so isolated that this is their culture, this is their tradition, this is what they understand and know about the world. And I'm granting that they're changing slightly with the internet, like everybody else is,
Hmm.
but that doesn't change their culture. And I think if you want to subjugate a people, the one thing you have to do is destroy their culture.
Yeah, yeah.
You have to
That's what
tape
they were trying to
bananas to
do,
the
right?
wall.
With
Duct tape.
education. They were starting with education. Wasn't that the
Yeah,
bone of contention? Was that they were putting in these international universities teaching all these gender study courses and things, and they said
right.
no. They kicked them out. So they
Yeah,
became somewhat of a pariah.
yeah. But I guess to kind of bring all this around into elections again, elections are a highly cultural thing. They are the expression, the political expression of culture, of tradition.
Mhm.
Um, the way the Indonesians vote and who they vote for and why they vote for them is an expression of who they think they are. And to a certain, the U.S. is kind of a unique situation because of why it exists. However, that said, the election is still an expression of U.S. culture, And when you try to appropriate it by whatever means, you are literally trying to destroy the culture. Literally. There is
Good point.
no argument about that.
Good point. Yeah.
Well, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I have to leave you now, Bernard. I have some family obligations, but I just wanted to say thank you for inviting me. And it's really great that shows like this still exist, because this is horrible to say, but who knows, in a few years, maybe what we're doing right now, we'll have to do in Hungarian. So I hope
You
you're
never
brushing
know.
up on your Hungarian. It's not that crazy. I mean, right now, if you had told me a couple of years ago that we'd all be walking around with medical masks and walking through all these checkpoints every 50 meters, I would tell you that, you're reading too much science fiction, too much
Yeah.
Aldous Huxley or whatever. But it's great that this show, that you can do this show. I just hope that maybe you can invite me back next year, and I hope we can do it in English still, not in
Well, you
Hungarian
never
or
know.
Serbo-Croatian, Polish.
Well, you speak Polish. Well, we could do it in Indonesian because we both speak that. So
Yeah. So yeah. But anyways, thanks for
thanks
having
for
me.
popping in. It was great to have somebody to talk to about all this. And
Okay.
maybe one day we'll be able to get together physically again.
Well, let's hope. Yeah, I'm preparing some medical masks. Yeah, so I can make a foray out and we can meet.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, Bernard.
Sounds great. Take care, man.
Take care.
Thanks. Okay, well, that was my buddy Chris. He's a fellow expat here in Indonesia. I've known him now for several years. He's been here about 25 years. I've been here 13 years. So we're pretty steeped in the local culture. We know about the politics and the traditions and the elections here. We got kind of far afield from elections, but I think it's important to discuss culture in the context of elections because, as I mentioned earlier, elections are the political expression of culture. If you destroy the election or you undermine an election, you are literally destroying the culture of a country. The elections are always based on tradition, they're based on ideals, they're based on law, and any one of those three things, those pillars of culture, if one of them is destroyed, the whole thing crumbles. And that's the thing about the U.S. election that's so important. I personally, I could care less who wins. I'm not a Trump fan. I'm definitely not a Biden fan. So I'm not worried about who wins. What I'm worried about is the process. And at the very beginning of this thing, I described how the elections work here, in that you have to show up in person. You have to bring a letter from your local RT RT, and you have to show identification, and you have from 7 a.m. to 7 or 12 noon to vote on a paper ballot. If you don't make it in the time frame, too bad. And then within 30 minutes to an hour, they start counting the votes in my precinct right here in front of my house using a PA, and I can hear them, one vote for this candidate, one vote for that candidate. Oh, one vote for this candidate. And then at the end, they read off the total number of votes for each candidate. And then in a couple of days, once everything has been sent into the central collection area, I can go online to the website and I can check, did they actually count the same number of ballots at the central location, the formal count, as they did right here in front of my house? So I'm not saying it's perfect, but it's certainly much more transparent than what we're seeing in the U.S. And with regard to the U.S., I want to bring up something. Let me share my screen here. There's a website here that I found. And this article is written by an attorney, a JD. If you scroll down, you'll find his you'll find his credentials, his bona fides. But what he says is that there is a law in the U.S., 3 U.S. Code sections 1 through 18. And this is important if you're really interested in how this election will be resolved, then you need to read 3 USC sections 1 through 18. Specifically, section 1, which says that the legislatures may allow any means that they so choose to select electors. Okay, that's great. So most states now say, okay, we'll have a popular vote to select the electors. I don't know if I can scroll on this thing. I guess not. Anyway, but they have to select electors by midnight on election day. By midnight on election day. That is the key phrase in the law. And this is the law of the land. 3 USC sections 1 through 18. The first section says that the legislatures can let anybody select electors however they want, but they must be selected by midnight on election day. If they are not, the right to select the electors is plenary, and if they are not selected at the appointed time, which is midnight on election day, the right revolves back to the legislature. And now the legislature has the right to select the electors at any time from election day until the Electoral College meets, which this year I believe is 14 December. So we're still 2 weeks away from the actual election. Now, it is my belief that what we are seeing right now, all the lawsuits and all of this, is bread and circuses. It's designed to distract people and to keep them from looking at 3 USC sections 1 through 18, because that's the key. And the thing is that the 5 or 6, I think it's 5 states that are under contention right now, they all have, I think all but one have Republican-dominated legislatures. And since these states did not select the electors by midnight on election day, then all of this haranguing and blah and media circus is pointless. It has all gone back to the legislatures now, and the only people that will make the decision are the legislature, the legislators. All right. So if you are concerned about this, then the one thing you can do to change the course of history is to contact your legislator and tell them what you think. Now, the American system is strange. It's unusual. It's unique in all the world that I've ever seen. And I've lived in 6 or 7 countries now and seen a lot of elections. I've never seen anything like the U.S. system. But the key thing to remember is that the United States of America is not a democracy. Never has been, and until they change the Constitution, never will be. The only bodies authorized to select electors in a presidential election are the legislatures. So 50 of them. Now they can delegate that right in it's called a plenary right. They can delegate it but they can take it back at any time. The only rule that they have to follow is if that they void an election, it must be void for all voters, all votes in that state. They can't say, well, these votes are void, but these aren't. All right. So if Pennsylvania, if the legislature passes a bill or passes a rule, they don't have to pass a bill. They pass a rule that says we are taking back this right and we void all votes in the November 3rd election. That is their constitutional right. That is their legal right under 3 USC sections 1 through 18. And according to the Supreme Court decision in Bush v. Gore, all right, the Supreme Court reaffirmed 3 USC 1 through 18. So there is no choice. As long as the legislature say all votes in that election are now void and we will choose the electors, then nobody can say anything. If all voters were disenfranchised by that decision, then there is no complaint at all. None. There is no recourse. If the legislature says we're going to have a new election following these new rules, they can do that. They can do anything they want. But in the end, it is the legislature's 3 USC 1 through 18. It is the legislatures that will decide who votes. And I see a message from Alan, it looks like. Great conversation. Thanks. Well, thank you, Alan. Very nice to have you aboard. Yes, Chris is a very interesting guy. He and I have been friends for many years. We kind of have our Algonquin roundtables when there aren't fictitious viruses floating around. And we sip gin and tonics and we talk about life, the universe, and everything. And he's a really great guy, very smart. And he's been here about twice as long as I have. So he's very familiar. We're both married to Indonesians. He's got 2 kids here in Indonesia. I've got 3 here. So we're pretty well steeped in this culture, this country. And at least in my case, I will be here probably until they put me in the ground. But going back to the election thing, we have Article 2, Section 1, paragraphs 2 and 3 of the Constitution that describe or create the electoral system and empower the legislatures. Then, in order to enact the Constitution, the Congress passed a law, 3 USC sections 1 through 18. Go read them. It will be a revelation to you, I guarantee you. And by that law, the legislatures may grant the right to vote for president to anybody they want, or not vote for president, but vote for the electors any way they want. But the electors must be chosen and seated by midnight on election day, or the legislature does their thing. And why is that important? Well, because of the 5 contested states, which I think are Georgia, maybe more. Let's see, Georgia, Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, Arizona, and Nevada, 6 states. I believe 4 or 5 of them are dominated by Republicans in the legislature. Well, guess who gets to pick the electors? Because none of those states certified their electors by midnight on election day. So Section 2 of 3 USC now kicks in, and the legislatures take back their right, and now they are free to choose the electors however they want. and they can choose to nullify the election. And under the 14th Amendment, as long as that nullification applies to every voter in the state, that's their right. If they favor any one particular group of voters, well, then they're open for all kinds of nastiness. However, all they have to do is just say, we will now select the electors, we take back the right, and these 4 or 5, I want to say 5 Republican-dominated legislatures will now select the electors, because we know that these states did not choose their electors by midnight on election day. So if you, Article 3 of the U.S. Code, sections 1 through 18 are unambiguous. They are clear as day. There is no argument. So it is not a matter of belief or what you want, or that you can sue your way out of it. Trump or Biden, whoever these legislatures select, that is their pure right. The Supreme Court has already backed it up several times, most recently in 2000 with Bush v. Gore. But in any case, the states that are in question have already abrogated their right to select electors in terms of the vote. So now it is only the legislatures that have the power to select the electors. That is the law. It is clear as day. You don't have to be a lawyer to understand it. Just look up 3 USC sections 1 through 18. Sections 1 and 2 are the key sections that you need to look at. But there is no doubt, none whatsoever, that the power now to elect the next president, is exclusively in the hands of the legislatures in the states that are under contention. They can void the election altogether, as long as they say that every person that voted, every vote is hereby void and null, and we will choose the electors. That is perfectly within the law. There is no contention about it. There's no misunderstanding about the law. It is not vague. It is clear as day. That's the way it's going to be. So I've droned on quite a bit here. I am deeply appreciative of the people that have dropped in. I have been wanting to talk about this for some time, because not only because of the way the Indonesian elections are done, which I think is extremely transparent, and yes, they have their problems, but also because I've heard in the U.S. media and in various discussions, we're like a third world banana republic. Well, I live in the third world, and I live in a republic, and this republic has at least 15 different varieties of bananas. It's unbelievable. I never knew there were so many kinds of bananas. But I'm here to tell you, living in a third world banana republic, that the elections here are far more transparent than anything I've seen in the U.S. in my entire life. So the elections there are not like third world banana republics. They're worse. But there is a legal process that nobody is talking about. And I don't know why. I suspect the media are hiding it because they don't want you to know this, so that you won't put pressure on your legislators. But 3 USC section 1 through 18 means that no electors in the contested states were selected by midnight on election day, 3 November. Therefore, the right to choose the electors goes directly back to the legislators. So call your legislator and tell them who you want, because they are the ones that will choose. There is no ambiguity. There is a possibility that it could happen, be mucky from there, but you've removed 99% of all the possible outs with this law. So all I can say is get in there, talk to your legislators, and tell them who you want. It doesn't matter. I don't care who you want. You can tell them you want Mickey Mouse, but the fact of the matter is that the law says it is the legislatures at this point that will choose the electors. No doubt about it. So with that, I would recommend this article here. It is very good. It is very thorough. It quotes the law. It quotes the Supreme Court decisions. It is written by a lawyer. This is not a conspiracy theory or some crackpot like me sitting in Indonesia telling you what to think. The article itself is written by an American lawyer who is using American law and the American Constitution to tell you how it's going to be. And I highly recommend that if you want to understand the U.S. electoral system, that you go read this article, because it is eye-opening. I read it and I was like, wow, this is what Trump is after. He's not after all these court cases. The court cases are meaningless. All that is to prove that all the votes are void. All right. There's so much corruption and so many questions over the votes that we can't use those votes as a guide. But regardless, the electors were not selected and seated by midnight on 3 November. Therefore, 3 USC Section 2, the legislatures will pick the electors anytime they want between now and when the Electoral College meets on 14 December. So if you want Biden, or if you want Trump, or if you want Mickey Mouse, or Pat Paulson. Pat Paulson was one of my favorites for many, many years. He ran for president, I think, most of my life. But if you want any of those characters to be your next president, call your legislator, email your legislator, tell them what you want, because they are the ones who will choose at this point. The court decisions are done. All this other stuff is bread and circus. It means nothing. Maybe you're trying to prove that the votes are void, but it doesn't matter. The electors weren't seated at midnight on election day. Therefore, the choice goes back to the legislatures. The law is as clear as it can possibly be. There is no ambiguity. There's no cloudy days. There's no you can't interpret the words any other way. That's what's going to happen. So with that, I will leave you at about 11 or 1 hour and 20 minutes in. I do appreciate everyone who stopped by and the people who have commented. I am thinking about doing these more often. So if you like what you heard and saw today and are interested, leave me a note. Or you can go to my website, which is radiofarside.com, and you can send me an email. Let me know what you think, and if you think these are worth having. I've done a couple of jungle rants, but they were all recorded and edited. This is the first live one I've ever done. But I hope you enjoyed it, and I thank you for stopping by. Have a wonderful weekend, and call your legislators. Thank you. See you soon.